You know, they say it's about the journey, not the destination. If the destination for Jaren Hall was the NFL, he's here and he's ready to try to make a team. But the journey is certainly a story worth telling. Welcome to the Everyman series on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. And a special shout out to the hashtag everydayers that do listen to this show every single day. I appreciate you. Today on the show, we're continuing with the Everman series doing Jaren Hall. Today, I have a little conversation with Jake Hatch, who does Locked On Cougars, to talk about him. That'll be later in the show. But first, I want to actually take you back to 1992 at a junior college in Utah that we now know as Utah Tech. A young running back named Kalen Hill this would have been 1991. He signed to BYU in the 1992 season. Kalen Hill has been through a lot growing up, a lot of moving around, a lot of other stories that we don't need to tell, but suffice to say, it's not the part of his life he looks back on the most fondly. But going to JUCO at Utah Tech and being in Utah introduces Kalen Hill to the Church of Latter-day Saints. The LDS and Mormonism in general is going to be a really big part of this one because it's a really big part of Jaren Hall's story. And the reason for that is because of what Kalen Hill found in the 90s. He found that his life completely 180'd once he found the church and that sense of community and his faith and all that stuff. And he sees that as like there's like a before he found his faith and an after he found his faith. And before he found his faith, he sees it's like, this is the nightmare of what it's like living without faith. And this is really like core thing to who he is. And he instilled that in all of his kids. Fast forward to 2016, his son Jaren is graduating from Maple Mountain High in Spanish Fork, Utah, which, by the way, Kalen Hill is the head coach there now as of this past December. He's also playing baseball, which he will play throughout college as well. Keep that in mind. There are also two other Hall boys that are playing running back at BYU. Jaren is younger than them, and he is going to be a quarterback. He's committed there. But not before his mission. There isn't a lot of choice, he says, for Jaren Hall to go on a mission or not. He's going to go on the mission. I think that's just the household he was raised in. And you know, he said like back in that time, he was a teenager, he's whining about it. Like, I want to go to college. Like, I'm excited about this. But it's like, it's not like something his parents made him do. This is really core to who Jaren Hall is as well, his faith. And, the mission itself was a really big experience that was like really formative with him. So these Mormon missions, he ends up going to somewhere in Northern California, which is like, it's not always like this, way abroad thing. But he goes to like Northern California, and basically you wake up at like 6:30, you work out, maybe study a little, but you work out for like a half hour, and then you basically ride your bike around all day and tell anyone you come across about the good word of the Church of Latter-day Saints. That's, the whole thing, right? You're just riding around on your bike telling people about Jesus. And that's, of course, the point of it. That's why this is, we just want to spread the word of Mormonism, and that's kind of the point of all these missions. But it's also a sense of building and becoming part of a community. You'll stop and you'll help someone with their groceries. You'll help them with whatever they need to do. Hey, can I help you across the street? That kind of thing. And that element of service is like a really important part of it that Jaren Hall will tell you about and say, yeah, like it's not just like bothering people at their front door. We're trying to like really be positive influences on the world around us, right? There's this one story that he tells that kind of captures the weird it's like the Fight Club quote, the single serving friend thing that happens here. So they're riding their bikes around and they see a woman who's getting robbed. She's getting her purse snatched, and this guy makes off with her purse. So they quickly get into their mission issue vehicle and go after him. And like they're not looking to get into a tussle with this guy who knows if he's armed or whatever, how dangerous he is. So they just kind of like keep their distance, but they keep an eye on him and they call the cops. And they follow him and he like turns into a street and it's like this is kind of a familiar street. And then he like hops a fence and they're like, wait a minute, that's where we live. And this guy just like by total happenstance jumped right into like where they were staying. So they were like, well, I guess we'll just kind of hang out here until the cops arrive and get this like burglar out of our backyard. So the cops get there and they don't want anything to do with it afterwards. They're like, you got this, right? Okay, we're going to go like keep telling people about Jesus. Like we're not here to like get the guy or whatever. We just wanted to make sure the situation was resolved. So they go move on. They were told later the purse was recovered and returned. The guy was caught and whatever. And they just kind of bail out and keep talking about the good word of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Just another day at the office. So over their time doing this, they will work with Jaren and his companion. They kind of work in pairs. And his companion start working with this alcoholic guy who joined the church a long, long time ago. And he's still like on and off with his drinking and struggling. And they're trying to kind of like, they're building a relationship with this guy and they want to help him with his alcoholism, right? Try to help him with, coping or try to find a solution. Like they want to help this guy with his problem, right? But man, you're like a couple of 18-year-old kids and this dude's like 60. Like he has demons you have not even thought of. And Jaren Hall has grown up relatively, nice enough life, privileged, Utah Mormon life. He maybe heard a story or two from his dad, but the kind of hardship that this other guy sounds like he has gone through is not something that Jaren Hall can really like relate to. And it's not a perspective that he's familiar with. And he has to kind of take a step back as he's talking to and learning about this guy and just sort of think from that perspective and sort of think about what it's like to be someone that isn't you. And if you ask him about his mission, he'll tell you that that's like a really big part of like what he learned on it, which is there are so many people that you meet, that you interact with, that you maybe just come in for a cup of coffee. Maybe you just pass them at the park and give them a pamphlet. And maybe you build a long relationship with them, whatever it is. There are a lot of different people of a lot of different walks of life that you will interact with. And you kind of have to learn how to think from their perspective. And maybe that's part of the value here. Meeting other people with other experiences and teaching yourself to think like them and better understand where they're coming from when they're having a problem or a thought or an opinion or a something that you can't relate to. And that's going to come into play a lot when you have to join a college football team or any football team past like the high school level where everybody's maybe from the same community, where you get a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life. And that kind of brings us to actually playing football at BYU. But before I go deeper into that, let me talk to you about the best tasting protein bar on the planet. It is Built Bar. Built Bar has been insanely clutch for me the last few weeks. I've been trying to be a little healthier and watch my calories and stuff like that, but I'm still weak. And I have no self-discipline. And so I still maybe at, 12, 15 a.m. I want a chocolatey snack. And that is where Built Bar comes in because they only have like 130 calories, 17 grams of protein, only 4 grams of sugar. Not going to totally screw up your day, but covered in 100% chocolate, and they taste absolutely delicious. My favorite is the cookie dough chunk puff because the cookie dough chunks really do taste like something you get in like cookie dough ice cream or something like that. They really scratch that itch with the 100% chocolate. Absolutely delicious. Plus, you can now go to Walmart or Sam's Club and actually just get a box directly off the shelf. You don't have to wait for shipping. But if you prefer, you can still go to built.com and get a box delivered directly to your door. You don't have to leave the couch. Once again, that is built.com. You can thank me later. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. And a special shout out to those who do listen each and every day. Love you guys. For your second thing that you after you're done listening to this, I would love it if you checked out patreon.com/LukeBraun NFL. You can find a breakdown of Jaren Hall, a little more X's and O's, or you can go find a couple on Jordan Addison, a Mekhi Blackman, a Dwayne McBride. There's a lot there, and as well as the 7-part documentary series on the history of the entire Minnesota Vikings, if you'd rather live in a little bit of nostalgia. Let's move on to Jaren Hall actually playing some football. He's at BYU now, and 2019 is his first year there. The thing about this, though, is remember, he's on a mission for the last 2 years, and he can only work out for like half an hour. Like, he's not staying in football shape for a few years. You're riding your bikes and eating ramen noodles, like somebody so eloquently put it in one of the articles that I will link in the show notes. Yell at me if I forget. You have, no power or definition or any of that. Like, it is a very different body type that you'll show up to camp as, and you have to kind of get back into shape. So he will take a redshirt year in 2019. Or I'm sorry, 2018 is when he takes that redshirt year. 2019 is when he's actually a redshirt freshman, first year of eligibility, and he's been out of high school for 3 years now, and he's just now starting to eat into his eligibility, which is it goes to explain why he came out so old. He didn't really start his college career until 3 years after high school. So he's competing with Zach Wilson and another experienced quarterback for the starting job, but the Cougars are going to stick with Zach Wilson for that 2019 season. But in October, Zach Wilson will fracture his thumb, and that sets up Jaren Hall to get an actual start as a redshirt freshman. That's actually kind of a big deal for BYU because they've never had a black quarterback before. Jaren Hall is the first black quarterback to ever start for BYU. And you get this kind of moment of reflection of everybody that kind of paved the path for him to be able to do it and everything he's accomplished to be able to get there. His dad going through the JUCO ranks, getting to BYU and then raising a family and sending 3 more kids to BYU, one of them first ever black quarterback. There's a really great beauty in that. But unfortunately, the moment is short-lived because in the middle of that game, Jaren Hall will suffer a concussion and he won't finish it. And a couple weeks later, he's out of the concussion protocol and he gets to start again for one half against Utah State. Zach Wilson's still out with a thumb. And he leads the BYU Cougars to a huge lead in that game. They blow out Utah State in that game, but he suffers another concussion. And that gets really scary. And I think that sort of gets in Jaren Hall's head. Like when you see the quotes he has about it, he's like, yeah, that was freaky. Like your brain is your everything, right? Like that's not the thing you want to be playing around with. That would be it for him that year. It was only a couple of starts because it was really just relief duty for Zach Wilson, who would get healthy in time to start again. So then there's 2020, and he suffers a hip injury, and he's actually going to miss the entire 2020 season with a hip injury now. That really stinks because it's the COVID year, and so you're not really in the facility as much if you're not practicing. You're kind of away from the team. And it feels almost like a pseudo year off, even though you're rehabbing something, but it feels like this weird pseudo year off. I also want to call attention again to the fact that he's playing baseball throughout a lot of this. And baseball athleticism is going to be a different thing. You're just going to maybe have a different body type. It teaches you how to throw, and he's got a great arm. We'll talk about that with Jake Hatch in a second here. But it's different. And I wonder if there is a certain amount of, I don't know, I'm totally off the board speculating here, but I wonder if there was something to those injuries that had to do with being a 2-sport athlete, the fatigue you put on your body, but also the type of athlete you are going to be for the baseball season. And then the type of athlete you're going to be for the football season are kind of at odds with each other. And maybe that is going to make him a little bit less bulky and a little bit less able to absorb contact safely. But 2020 is a very good year for the Cougars, even though they don't have their backup all year. It's the Zach Wilson getting drafted 2 overall year because he'll declare now. So 2021, this is Jaren Hall's team. And again, I need to just point out the timeline here. It's been quite the journey. 2016 is when he graduated high school. 2021, he is finally starting a college football season. and like starting for sure on purpose, not because of an injury. Um, but like again, at this point, to this point, he's spent more time really developing as like a person than as a player, and there's nothing wrong with that from like a human standpoint. But it's a very weird place to be. He's like 22 and he's raw. Like that's bizarre. It feels weird. But he also has this maturity that again Jake will talk about in this interview coming up. He has this maturity and this leadership that he brings to the team, this ability to kind of to see from someone else's perspective that maybe got recruited to BYU but didn't have nearly at all the same life as Jaren Hall did. The ability to problem solve and be personable and kick up a conversation with somebody. A lot of experience kicking up a conversation with somebody. And I think all of those things really lead him to be this like he's really like a commanding presence. There's this anecdote that somebody, it was Alec Lewis in The Athletic, told from one of the coaches from Jaren Hall's time as a backup, where they were having these kind of early season conversations about like what our tone's going to be and mental toughness and accountability and the kind of stuff you talk about on like day one of a football program. And they had meeting after meeting after meeting. Practice really hadn't ramped up yet, and the kids were all really antsy. The students were all really antsy, and they were going to do like one last meeting. But Jaren Hall said, "Hey, can I actually go in and talk to the rest of my teammates really quick?" It's like, "Yeah, you can go do that." And he had them like captured, like just totally enraptured in what he had to say, even though it had been like a long day of just listening to people talk. There is this like respect for Jaren Hall that really left its mark at BYU. I think that's really cool. For more on this time at BYU, here is an interview with Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars. All right, everybody, here with Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars, covers BYU for the Locked On Network. So you have been covering Jaren Hall for a little bit, and got to get the scoop from somebody who knows him quite a bit better than Vikings fans who we just kind of met him. So I guess I've started all of these with the same question. What is the like explain to a fan that doesn't watch college football scoop on Jaren Hall? Like what's the sort of broad strokes that you would give to someone?
The thing about Jaren Hall is he's a guy who is absolutely fearless. Now, I'll also acknowledge that he's dealt with injuries throughout his career at BYU. He sat behind Zach Wilson for 2 seasons. I've actually covered the entirety with the podcast, doing what I've done. I've covered the entirety of his career at BYU. And to his credit, he easily could have up and transferred when Zach Wilson beat him out 2 years in a row for that starting job. But he was patient, stuck by the program, and obviously benefited by being the star of the past 2 seasons, and now getting his shot in the NFL with the Vikings.
Nice. And so he did that and then he did his mission, right? And then he came back and played a couple years.
Yeah, so he actually straight out of high school went on his LDS mission. Now, for most people
Oh,
out
okay.
there, yeah, so he went out for 2 years, came home, redshirted for a year, and then battled with Zach for 2 seasons before ultimately assuming the starting role. So he's been around college football for a hot minute. He's 24 years old, so he's a little bit older than your typical rookie. But the one thing I think Vikings fans will come to love about him is he is a very mature young man, and the best part is you don't have to worry about any of the off the field hijinks. He's married, he's got a kid. This is a kid who understands what it's all about, and he's had a dream since he was a young man to be an NFL quarterback. So I can assure you, he is going to do everything within his power to live that dream.
That's super awesome. So say a little bit more about you mentioned that he's fearless. What do you mean by that? Is that a way that he plays, or is that like a risk taking thing?
A little bit of both, actually. The thing about this is he's played. So in college football, we all know there's a Power Five and G5 delineation, and BYU during the time Jaren Hall was there was a independent program. They were playing a national schedule, playing all over the country, playing a number of programs. They're pretty high profile and had some pretty good pass rush they would go up against. And he was a guy that when he was out there, it didn't seem to phase him no matter what the circumstances were out there on the football field. The other thing I like about him is you talk about some of the gambling nature. He's got the ability, if he feels like he's got an opportunity to make a big play, he will go for it. That's kind of they at BYU, they very much kind of buy into the whole risk it for the biscuit mentality at times on offense, and they will take shots down the field. And he absolutely plays into that. The other thing about this is he's got an underrated ability to really run with the football. I know that NFL teams are averse to the quarterback running that much, but when he sees an opportunity to get you with his feet, he will absolutely use it.
Yeah, I think in the NFL, it's if you see it run, right? Like the NFL
Yeah,
quarterbacks, I mean, we just saw Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts in the Super Bowl. Like they're coming around.
yeah, they
They're
are to a
not to the
degree.
degree that yeah,
Yeah,
they're coming around a little bit, but yeah, it's more that, they want you to keep your eyes up when you're scrambling around, and they still want you to be like, if it's a passing play, it's a passing play. And if,
correct.
you can be your own check down if you want, but get through your progression first, that kind of thing. Now, look, when you come out at 24, and that's been a huge part of like the discussion surrounding Jaren Hall is, hey, he's so much of older of a rookie. And it's makes sense that we've got a lot of older rookies this year because we've got a lot of kids with an extra year eligibility from COVID and all that stuff. Um, but with Jaren Hall, this is somebody who played. He's got, what does that make? 2, 3 years of experience. This isn't somebody that was in college for like 6 years, just kind of dunking on 19-year-olds. He couldn't do any better, right?
Yeah, obviously the 2 years he was out in the mission field, he was not around football. A lot of people, the misconception
Mhm.
around LDS missions is it's like a training thing. No, they ain't training out there. They get about 30 minutes a day to actually work out. They actually come back in many cases in worse shape than they've ever been in for most of their life, and they have to work their way back into football shape. So he obviously dealt with injuries. He had a hip injury the first year that he was competing with Zach Wilson for that starting job that knocked him out for the entirety of the season. I'm not convinced it was necessarily a season-ending injury. I just think that BYU told him, "Hey, we want you to rest up. Zach's our guy this season. You rest up, get fully healthy, and then we'll run it back next year." They battled the following year. Zach ultimately won the job, ended up being the number 2 pick with the New York Jets. But then that gave after that the next 2 years were all Jaren Hall. Now he dealt with injury concerns during both of those seasons. One of them was a rib injury that he suffered, actually scrambling of all things. So going to the point of being careful when
There
you
you
run
go.
with the football. But then he also, at the end of this past season, got a high ankle sprain in the regular season finale and wasn't able to play in the bowl game. And actually, in many ways, hampered his pre-draft preparation because he just wasn't fully healthy. High ankle sprains are notorious for lingering. So the one thing that Jaren's got to prove at the NFL level is he can stay healthy and be available. Because I say it all the time on my show, the best ability is availability. And there's been times during his career where he has just not been available.
Yeah, that was kind of going to be my next question. Like, if Jaren Hall is coming into a situation, he's competing for a backup job. If he's going to make the team, it might have to be as QB3, or maybe he doesn't make the team and he ends up somewhere else or something like that. Um, but if he doesn't make it in the NFL, very much in the realm of possibility, is it an injury thing, or like what is the knock here that would prevent him from being able to beat out a Nick Mullins or find
I
another
think
job somewhere else if he doesn't?
Yeah, I think it would be a combination of his injury history because I'm sure there were teams that just looked at his career at BYU and said, "Man, there's just too many red flags with that medical report," and they probably just like, "We just can't risk it with that." So that may nix him in. But at the same time, there's been a thing over the years with BYU and these guys who serve these LDS missions. They're older players, and we all know this. If you have two players of comparable value, you're going to go with the younger player just due to the upside and the extra time on their side in terms of development. So that if he does not make it, I think it'll be a combination of those two factors. I think the on the field type stuff, the ability to process defenses, his ability to run with the football, and I think frankly his arm is a little bit underrated in all of this. It's not necessarily the greatest arm, but I think it has been underrated at times. That type of stuff, I don't think will necessarily end his NFL career prematurely.
Yeah, see a lot of like opposite hash corners and go balls and stuff, like flying across those big wide college hashes. And I'm like, man, this guy can really sling it. But I guess the
Mhm.
other thing I wanted to like check in with is there are a lot of like bozo turnovers. And kind of, moments where you're like, what in the world were you thinking? And maybe that was a turnoff. That's the kind of thing that'll drop you to the fifth round if you have too many of those. There was a draft video that the Vikings released with their combine interview with Jaren Hall. And they didn't show the play, but I'm pretty sure I know which one it was, where Kevin O'Connell said, "Oh, I don't really blame you too much for this one. You're looking for protection." And Jaren Hall kind of said, "Well, I shouldn't try to throw that go ball." And I think there was like a really bad, I want to say it was a Boise State where he was a really bad pick. I might be thinking of a different one, where he like threw a really bad one, scrambling back foot, like super nasty interception, like that kind of thing. Is that something that's just innate to him, or is that something that if you get him in and say, "Hey, we're going to maybe chill out on the risk taking a little bit, teach him how to throw away," that can kind of be ironed out of his game?
That is something that he has worked to develop at BYU. I actually watched him in high school. He played here locally in Utah in high school. And I will kindly say that the offense he played in high school was, "Hey, Jaren, you're out there on the sand lot, draw it up in the dirt and let's go do this thing." And he was all over the
Sure.
place, running everywhere. He's the best athlete on the field. So I understand why he did what he did, but at times it did get him into trouble because you're right. He would try and loft a pass off a back foot, that type of a deal, and would get him into trouble. And that was something that at times it reared its ugly head at BYU. The nice part is each year I saw him at BYU, he progressively got better and better at avoiding those. He still will need to have Kevin O'Connell, who I actually consider one of the best quarterback gurus in the NFL currently. He's going to have to continue to kind of teach him, hey, you don't have to risk it every single time. You can throw it away and live to play another down. And that will be something I think he'll continue to be coached on and coached up with the Vikings. But I do think at times it does catch up with him, and he does need to be a little more risk averse on that side of things.
Last thing, I've wrapped out all these interviews the same way. What is something that I do not know about Jaren Hall as somebody who's only really been able to kind of like Google what I can Google? What's something I don't know about Jaren Hall that I should know?
That he is just the easiest way to describe it is he is very mature when it comes to media interviews. When you get a chance to speak with him, you probably saw some of the interviews he's already done. He just comes off as a very mature young man. And there have been at times I've had people say he comes off as a robot in a way because he's just so I guess media savvy in a way.
Yeah,
But
that's
that's
what
just
you're coached to do. Yeah.
yeah, but here's the thing. Was raised in a football family. His dad was a star running back at BYU. His older brother played at BYU. His younger brother currently plays at BYU. His other brother actually plays baseball for BYU. This is a BYU family that plays football. He was raised his entire life to play this sport, but at the same time, his dad at the same time was very good in terms of, okay, this is how you handle yourself talking with the media, that type of stuff. So he may come off a little robotic and a little stiff at times, but the one thing I know about Jaren is he's very very mature, but at the same time he's got a little bit of a fun streak in him. So if you can crack that shell with him, speaking of the opportunities to speak with him, he is a pretty fun kid to talk to.
All right, looking forward to getting to know Jaren Hall a little better as OTAs and camp and all that stuff goes on. Thank you so much to Jake Hatch. You can of course find Locked On Cougars wherever you find Locked On Vikings, but you also do radio in that area as well, right?
Yeah, the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City. I do morning drive radio, and it's a lot of fun. But Locked On Cougars, as you mentioned, Luke, you can find it wherever you get your podcasts. Also available on YouTube.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jake.
Thank you.
Once again, you can find Jake Hatch. You can find Locked On Cougars wherever you find Locked On Vikings, any audio platform, YouTube. I will see you all next week. We'll see if there's any news to talk about. If not, we'll kind of just keep plugging away at this stuff. There is some offensive line stuff that I want to do soon, so get hyped for that. I'm actually really, really excited for it, but I'm still sort of honing my own abilities there. And then hopefully I'll be able to bring you something of a good amount of value. In the meantime, take care of yourself. Drink water if you're going outside. It's supposed to be hot. And as always, Skull.